Welcome to this session of Understanding Human Anatomy. I'm going to continue talking about the upper extremity, and the area I want to talk about is the axilla, what is commonly referred to as the armpit. And just for reference, I've already sketched in a scapula, a humerus, clavicle. You see the acromion here of the scapula articulating with the clavicle, the manubrium over here of the sternum, and then a little bit of the body of the sternum. And then in gray, I've sketched in a few ribs so that we have at least the beginning of a rib cage. Now, the axilla is an area that's bounded by muscle, and it's roughly pyramidal shaped, so it'll have three walls, and those walls are made up of muscles. The first muscle I'm going to draw in is Latissimus dorsi. And Latissimus dorsi takes origin from the fascia of the back, and a few fibers originate from the scapula, and it inserts on the lesser tubercle of the humerus, like so. And it's a muscle that comes up from the back. It's a very broad muscle in the back, but as it gets up here into the humerus near its insertion, it narrows down. So it's a fan-shaped muscle. And let me draw in some muscle fibers here so that we just get an idea of the way these fibers run through the muscle. Now this muscle acts to adduct the humerus. It also acts to rotate the humerus. Those are its main actions. So the Latissimus dorsi have it spread out a little bit more here. Like so. So Latissimus dorsi is one of the muscles that form the posterior wall. And I will write the name in the same color I used to draw the muscle. Now, the other muscle that contributes to the posterior wall is teres major. And teres major I'm going to draw in blue. And teres major takes origin from the scapula and inserts along the lesser tubercle along with latissimus. So it would be roughly in this region, taking origin like so. And what I'm going to do is color that in with a solid color. So that it can be distinguished from latissimus. And again, I'll use the same color as I did for the muscle on its label. So this is teres major. And it, together with latissimus, make up the posterior wall of the axilla. Now, I had it covering over the rib, and it's actually the rib is anterior to that muscle. The medial wall of the axilla is formed by the muscle called serratus anterior. And serratus takes origin from the rib cage and inserts on the medial border of the scapula and the muscle wraps around the rib cage, and it actually takes origin from the ribs itself, and it will have finger-like attachments to the ribs on the anterior thoracic wall. So this is a muscle that starts out posteriorly and then wraps around to the anterior. And again, I will color this in so that you can see it. And in the back, it would be posterior to the ribs. Then it wraps around anteriorly like so. Now, I'm not showing the whole muscle because I'm not drawing far enough down the thorax. But it is forming the medial wall of the axilla. So serratus anterior, and again, as I've done on the other ones, I will put the name in the same color as I use for the muscle. Red. Serratus anterior. The third wall is the anterior wall. And the anterior wall of the axilla is formed by the muscle Pectoralis Major. The Pectoralis Major takes origin from the proximal third of the clavicle and down onto the manubrium and body of the sternum. It'll have some fibers taking origin from ribs as well. And it runs across the chest and axilla to insert on the greater tubercle of the humerus. And this would be the most anterior of the muscles we've talked about in this session. So let me color this in, which will take some time because this is a big muscle. Large muscle on the anterior wall of the chest, Pectoralis Major. It's the muscle that is commonly referred to as the pect. Pectoralis Major. And again, as I've been doing with these muscles, I will type the name of the muscle for the drawing in the same color as the muscle. Now, Pectoralis Major, Latissimus, and Teres Major all share an action of adducting the shoulder joint, adducting the humerus. Pectoralis Major flexes the humerus, and flexion of the shoulder is to move the distal part of the humerus anteriorly. It's a little bit different than the typical flexion I talked about earlier. And Latissimus and Teres Major actually are extensors of the humerus. So if the humerus distal end was moved anteriorly, you bring it back into anatomical position. That's extension. These are the muscles that make up the wall of the axilla. I want to draw one more muscle in here that's not strictly part of the axilla, but is associated in this area. And so it'd be a good time to talk about it. And that muscle is the deltoid. So the deltoid is the muscle of our shoulder. It takes origin from the distal third of the clavicle and the distal third of the acromion. And then its fibers wrap around over the shoulder and down to attach onto the humerus. This is the deltoid. So we're going to have part of the deltoid posterior to the shoulder joint, part of it anterior to the shoulder joint, and it's going to be covering over the insertion of Pectoralis Major. It also is superficial to a number of other structures, number of other muscles. Deltoid. And deltoid acts to both flex and extend the shoulder. The posterior part would act to extend the shoulder. The anterior part will act to flex the shoulder. And it is a very strong and primary abductor of the shoulder joint. So this isn't part of any of the walls. So I'll put its name further down, and I won't put it as an indentation. But it's an important muscle in the area. Now, those were the muscles that make up the wall of the axilla, plus the deltoid. What's important to know about the axilla is also the contents of the axilla, because the axilla serves as a passageway. We have the axillary artery, and vein in the axilla, both running through the axilla from the thorax out to the upper extremity. We have the brachial plexus, which is a nerve plexus that provides the innervation to the upper extremity, and we'll talk about it much more later on. We'll find some lymph nodes in the axilla. The axillary lymph nodes, at least some of them will be actually within the axilla. And fat, or adipose tissue. And this you could take as one of the rules of the body, rules of anatomy. If the body has space that's not occupied by anything else, the body will fill it with fat. That serves several purposes. One, fat is a storage material for energy type nutrients. It also is protective in that it surrounds other structures and makes it harder for something to get at them. And it's just a good filler so that the other structures don't bounce around a lot, don't move around a lot. So the axilla contains the axillary artery and vein, the brachial plexus, lymph nodes, and fat. That concludes our discussion of the axilla. In the next video, I'll talk about the rotator cuff, a group of muscles that insert onto the humerus and rotate it and serve other important functions. Thank you for your attention.